Good evening. Wind turbines and solar arrays are all the rage right now, or so say climate activists determined to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy sources like wind and solar. Wind turbines and solar arrays are all the rage right now, or so say climate activists determined to replace fossil. Pardon me. My mistake. I am not a techie. At any rate, so say climate activists determined to replace fossil fuels with renewables to save the planet from catastrophic global warming. They think wind and solar are the answer. But the better people get to know them, the less they like them. Robert Bryce, one of the world's best writers on energy policy, author of Power Hungry, The Myths of Green Energy and the Real Fuels of the Future, and of Smaller, Faster, Lighter, Denser, Cheaper, and of the newest book, A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations, joins us tonight to discuss his new study, Not in Our Backyard, about how rural Americans are fighting back against gigantic renewable energy projects that threaten their health, their property values, and their energy security. It's not only the late Senator Ted Kennedy who can successfully block a wind factory, not a farm, by the way. It's ordinary folks like you and me. Tune in and learn how. So this evening, our guest is Robert Bryce, again, the author of Not in Our Backyard. And this is a wonderful study about how rural Americans are fighting back against the placement of giant wind factories or solar arrays right near their own homes. It's a wonderful study. And during the month of August, as our way of saying thank you when you make a gift of literally any size to support the work of the Cornwall Alliance, we'd be glad to send you a free copy of this study for your own use and for you to share with neighbors and friends. It is possible to fight back effectively against these things, and Robert Bryce tells how. To request your copy, simply go to cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Click on the donate button, and then as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, write in promo code 21-08. That's promo code 21-08, or the title, Not in Our Backyard, and we will be delighted to send you a copy. The Cornwall Alliance is a nonprofit, charitable, religious, and educational and scientific organization. Our purpose is to educate the public and policymakers on biblical earth stewardship, economic development for the very poor around the world, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, the wonderful, wonderful news that we can be reconciled, sinners like me, to the holy God by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. So I would invite you to come to cornwallalliance.org and learn more about what we do. You'll find hundreds of articles there, a number of major papers. And on our YouTube channel, Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, you'll find a whole lot of videos that we have, full-length documentaries as well as short videos, and as well on our Facebook page, of course. And if you're watching right now, you're using either our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. So thank you very much for joining us, and it's now my pleasure to bring on Robert Bryce. And he truly is just an astounding scholar. I've appreciated so many of his books and many of his articles in this field. He's taught me a lot, and he's going to teach me some more this evening, I'm quite sure. Robert, in listening to your podcast, Power Hungry Podcast, which I highly recommend to all of our viewers, I've found your technique of asking people to introduce themselves. You ask your guests to introduce themselves and tell the folks about your background. So I'm going to do that with you. I think it's a whole lot better than my trying to do it.
Okay, well, thank you, Cal, and I'm flattered to be invited. So who am I? Well, I'm a dad. My wife Lauren and I have three great kids, Mary, Michael, and Jacob. We're empty nesters just in the last a few months. I'm a husband. Lauren and I have been married for over 35 years and 2 months, in fact. So I've been very fortunate in my life with my family. And my work is about energy and power systems. That's what I've been doing the last 30 years. What do I consider myself? I consider myself basically a reporter. That's what I've always been. Always been in journalism, never had a real job. And I've written 6 books on the energy and power system. My first book was on Enron. My latest book, Cal mentioned A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. It came out last year. In fact, it came out in March when the COVID lockdown started. And then my new film, Juice, How Electricity Explains the World, came out in June when there was rioting in the streets. So the next time I publish anything major, then all of y'all out there, you need to buy canned goods and firearms because the end is near. That's my little bit of advice. But enough about that. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been very fortunate in my life. Got a big family of siblings and grandkids or nieces and nephews and some grandnieces and nephews and happy to be on the show. So let's get to it, Cal.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert. One of the things that you've recently done is a film called Juice. And I haven't had the time actually yet to see the whole thing, but what I have seen of it so far, I think is just extraordinary. You've been kind of all over the world looking into how energy, especially in the form of electricity, makes a difference in people's lives. Tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into making it? Where all did you go with it? What kind of experiences did you have with the many people you interviewed and saw them in their own settings?
Sure. Well, yeah, you can see the trailers. It's running there. My colleague here in Austin, Tyson Culver, and I met about 5 years ago, and I had just gotten a contract to write this book, and I thought, well, I'm writing this book on electricity. Why don't we make a documentary at the same time? How hard can that be? Well, the answer is it can be kind of hard. And we struggled to get it done. But in fact, we were successful, and I got the book out, got the film done. It's available now on Roku channel. You can watch it there for free. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Google Play, on YouTube, YouTube Premium, on all the major streaming platforms. The film is very simple. We tell the human story of electricity and why power equals power. We traveled over 60,000 miles, India, Iceland, Lebanon, Puerto Rico, Colorado, New York, looking at the world through the lens of electricity. And this is the world's most important and fastest growing form of energy. And the punchline in the film, and one of the many punchlines, is that electricity is critical for the advancement of women and girls. And today, around the world, about 3 billion people are using less electricity, less than 1,000 kilowatt hours per capita per year. About 3 billion people use less electricity than an average American refrigerator. So when we talk about the developing world, we talk about the poverty. The reality is the big disparity in the world today, the big inequality in the world today is between the electricity rich and the electricity poor. And one of the reasons why I'm so interested in the
Yeah.
issue of renewables is that I see them as really undermining the integrity of our electric grid. And I saw that myself here in Texas in February.
Yeah. I hear some people say, look, what we need is not centralized grids, big, huge grids that go over vast areas. We need distributed power, and solar and wind are just great for that. Uh, Tell me what you think of that in terms of a solution to the need for electricity in developing countries, sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America. Uh, how does that really work?
Sure, sure. Well, there's one great, or many great lines in the film. We had, more than 40 people interviewed in the film on camera, and one of them was a woman who was from Ghana, and she said, she was talking about solar panels. She said people aren't going to eat solar panels. She's making this analogy that just a little bit of electricity that you get from a few solar panels is not going to be enough for most homes or for small industry or manufacturing, that you need big grids, that you need large power plants. The reality is that renewable investments in wind and solar are happening in the rich countries, not in the poor countries. And that's just a fact. And why is that? Well, a lot of it is frankly because in the developed world, in the United States, there's a lot of money to be made by the companies that are pushing wind and solar. The tax credits that are
Yeah.
used for wind and solar are incredibly lucrative, and they're changing the market. They're distorting, in fact, the electricity market in states all across the country, including here in Texas and particularly in California. So this idea that it just fundamentally that we can run the economy, the global economy, on nothing but wind and solar, it's just flat wrong. It's not just wrong, it's dangerous, because we are risking, and not, it's not a small risk, losing tens of billions of dollars on technologies that not only are not going to be able to scale to the extent that we need, but that in fact are destabilizing our electric grid and costing tremendous amounts of money for people, in the form of higher rates for consumers who live in, low and middle income consumers. And I'm thinking here particularly about California, a state that has the highest poverty rate in America. It also has some of the highest electricity prices. How is that social
Yeah.
equity? It's not. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's always puzzled me how so many progressives can be celebrating wind and solar power when wherever they're entered into the grid in any significant amount, with the possible exception of Oklahoma, which is a strange case. It might be interesting to talk about that sometime, though I think not on this particular program. But wherever they're feeding much into the grid, the prices go up, and it's as if you're instituting a regressive tax. A progressive tax hits wealthy people harder than it hits poorer people. A regressive tax hits poorer people harder than it hits wealthy people. And that's exactly what goes on with the very energy sources that progressives seem to like so much. It's pretty ironic.
It's deeply unfortunate, Cal, and I agree with your sentiment there, because in particular the Democrats and the Democratic Party. And I say this, I'm not a partisan. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm just flat disgusted. But the
Yeah,
Democrats say they're the party of the poor and the working class. The reality is that the energy agenda that they are pushing is highly regressive. Whether it's EV mandates, whether it's electric vehicle charging stations, natural gas bans, which now you've got almost 50 communities in California that have passed bans on natural gas, even though natural gas is a quarter of the price of electricity on a BTU basis. This idea that we're going to electrify everything, including transportation, it will involve massive increases in electricity prices across the country.
yeah,
And as you point out, it will be incredibly regressive.
yeah. Um, you know, one of your earlier books was called Power Hungry: The Myths of Green Energy and the Real Fuels of the Future. I think that was the first of your books that I ever read, and it's really just an extraordinary thing. And in it, you what I, it's hard for me to describe exactly how you handle things there, but what struck me the most as I read that book was your whole discussion of the concepts of energy density and power density. We're going to get to a slide shortly that will talk about that, but before we get to that slide, I wonder if you would just briefly define those two concepts so that when we get there, people will know
Sure.
what you mean by energy density and power density.
Sure. Well, so, and thank you for mentioning this book. It's now out 11 years ago. It came out in 2010, and I've looked at it recently. I thought, well, this book has aged pretty well. I'm proud of
Yeah,
it. And a brief shout out to my publisher, Public Affairs. They published all six of my books. At
yeah,
been lucky in my publishing career. Have had the same editor, same publisher, same agent for more than 20 years now. And so, as I look back at that book, what is the basic message of the book? It's that our energy and power systems, and when I talk about energy, I'm talking mainly about oil and gas. When I talk about power, I'm talking about electricity. Our energy and power systems have evolved the way they have because of the four imperatives: power density, energy density, cost, and scale. Well, so I'll start with the last two. Cost, obviously, we want energy and power at the lowest possible cost that we can, because the more money we have in our pocket, or the cheaper our energy and power is, the more money we have to buy, to pay tuition for our kids in college, or buy food, do other things that add long term value for us, build a house, or improve a new car or washing machine. So cost matters a great deal. Scale is the other one. Whatever these, we've heard about all kinds of inventions of different things that could work, but when we try and scale them up to a marketplace here in the United States alone, where you have 330 million people, average consumption of total energy on an average day, something 40 or 45 million barrels of oil equivalent. That's across all of the forms of energy we consume. It's just a gargantuan amount of energy, some of which, of course, we turn into power. Natural gas we turn into electricity and so on. But the key ones in terms of physics are the metrics power density and energy density. What is power density? Power density is a measure of energy flow that can be captured from a given area, volume, or mass. So to be clear, power and energy are not the same things. Power is a measure of energy flow. It is how much energy you can make flow over a certain amount of time. Power is measured in watts. Energy is the ability to do work. To put it another way, energy is the ability to do work. Power is the rate at which work gets done. There are similar terms, but they're not the same thing. Energy is the amount of energy, so now to energy density. Imagine, so here's a water bottle. Well, so imagine I filled this with sawdust. Well, that would have less energy density than if I filled it with gasoline, right, or diesel fuel. The diesel fuel has a higher energy density. That is, for this volume, you would get a whole lot more energy in this little bottle with gasoline than you do with sawdust or with shredded paper or something, right? So energy density matters particularly in cars because we don't want to carry around big batteries. That's the reason why electric cars, for despite a century of hype, they still only capture 2% of the market. Well, why is that?
And
Well, fundamentally, it's about the energy density of the.
If you filled that bottle with air, there
Yeah.
would be some energy in there, wouldn't there? But the density would be a
Well,
whole lot less,
Well, of course,
right?
yeah. I mean, because there's no very little, there's no energy available in that bottle. But right. So,
Right.
but I
And
mean, or if we think about the energy density of if I took the equivalent weight in lead acid batteries or even lithium ion batteries compared to gasoline, far less. So that's the best analysis on energy density. But energy density, sometimes it's called specific energy, but energy density I think of as you can measure that by volume or by weight, gravimetric energy density or volumetric energy density. But the key really, Cal, since we're talking about wind, is power density, which is what is the footprint? What does it require? If you're going to have a nuclear plant, and I'm in the film and in the book, I talk about visiting the nuclear power plant in New York at Buchanan called Indian Point, which was shuttered. A travesty. It was shuttered finally in April. That power plant generated 2 gigawatts, 2 billion watts of power on a surface footprint of 1 square kilometer. It was incredible. From 1 square kilometer, they were powering essentially a quarter of all the electricity that was needed by the city of New York from a footprint of 1 square kilometer. Well, if you replace that just based on very conservative assumptions with wind turbines, you'd need an land area 1,300 times larger. So that's one of the best examples of power density that I can provide with you. But power density and an aerial power density, how many watts per square meter can you get from a given area? And that's the key. And so if we're serious about stewardship for the earth, we want small footprints, not large ones. Large footprints are the enemy of nature. They're the enemy of wildlife, and we want small footprints. Small footprints, as I said, power density is green.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm going to mess up our producer here by asking us to go out of order in terms of the slides that we have. But Jim, can you bring up slide number 3, 2700 megawatt challenge comparing power densities of various fuels? This is a slide of a figure, an illustration you have in your book, Power Hungry, Robert. And I would let's no, maybe Jim, you don't have it as number 3. It's 2700 megawatt challenge comparing power densities of various fuels. Um, it'll have, there we go, exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. Um, this I found back when I first read your book. I found this just an absolutely stunning illustration of the whole concept of energy and power density. Robert, sort of pick this apart for our viewers. And Jim, I think you can probably zoom in on some of that as Robert talks about it.
Well, yeah, this is an extension, Cal, of what I was just talking about, and in this graphic, this is now 10 or 11 years old. That I use horsepower per acre instead of watts per square meter, and I probably could have done them in both. Well, actually, I do have it. I'm trying to read my own thing here about watts per square meter, but nevertheless, the reality there is I point out the power density of wind energy is about 1 watt per square meter. Power density of solar, those numbers may be a little old. They're about 10 watts per square meter. But the reality is that when you look and you compare that to the power density in an oil well, or in fact, in the latest numbers for power density for natural gas production, they're achieving power densities based on the surface footprint of something approaching those of nuclear power plants. So what's remarkable, and I would say the takeaway from this slide that you're demonstrating, Cal, is that the power density of solar and wind is not going to change. They are fixed, and they're fixed by fundamental physical limits that are not going to be changed. And so this idea that we're going to be able to use wind and solar on a mass scale makes no sense whatsoever, because they can't change the laws of physics. The limits on wind energy is called the Betz limit. It's a basic function of fluid dynamics. You can't harvest more energy from the wind that's available there. There are natural limits on this. Solar panels are getting a little more efficient. That shows you about 10 watts per square meter. The South Texas project, I'm showing 56 watts per square meter instead of 2,000, which is the power density at Indian Point. 56 watts per square meter. I'm always counting the entire footprint of the entire South Texas project footprint, including the lake, the entire fenced area, which is a very large area, 18 square miles. But if you just counted the footprint of the power plant itself, which is what I did at Indian Point, the fenced area was only 1 square kilometer. So I mean, just the reality is that this is about physics. It's not about want to. It's not about politics. You can't cure this with money. This is just a simple function of physics.
Yeah, exactly. Well, our actual focus tonight is going to be on the whole issue of the location of major renewable energy projects, basically wind and solar, near people's residences, in areas where people live. And the fact that so many people are really beginning to protest this, to fight back against it. Um, Early on in your study, Not in Our Backyard, you have a graph of looking at the timeline of the number of rejections or restrictions of U.S. wind projects from 2015 to 2021. And it's interesting to me that the rejections or restrictions are declining over time. Now, the initial thought that one would get in looking at that would be, aha, people are getting reconciled to this. They're finding out, gee, these are just fine. I don't mind having one of these things close to me. Is that why the rejections or restrictions are declining over time in this graph?
Well, I would differ with your conclusion there, Cal, because this is a graphic that was produced earlier this year. I've been updating these numbers, and the latest number for 2021 is at least 21 wind energy rejections this year. So we're on track to, or potentially this year will exceed the number of rejections from 2018, and possibly get close to the numbers that were hit last year. So there are a couple of ways you can think about this in terms of why is this number in overall absolute numbers declining slightly. Well, part of it may be that the number of suitable wind projects and locations has declined, and
Yeah.
the other reality is that don't claim that I'm capturing every wind energy restriction or rejection. The fact is, this is a database that I've collected myself over the last 7 years,
Mhm.
because in God we trust, everybody else bring data. Well, so I needed to start collecting the data to prove the points that I was making about the strength and the widespread nature of these wind energy rejections. And the fact is that since 2015, from Maine to Hawaii, we've seen numerous small towns, small communities, counties rejecting wind projects. And what's remarkable to me on this, Cal, is that if you look at it from a purely political standpoint, and the political divide in America is very sharp. Where is wind probably the hardest to build? Well, it's in Democratic states, in particular in
Yeah,
Democratic states that have mandated large renewable portfolio standards, including, let's start, we'll name names. Vermont, the home of Bernie Sanders, who has been probably the most vociferous proponent of renewables in the U.S. Senate, ran on an all renewable energy platform in 2016. You can't build wind energy in Vermont. The only
yeah,
pending wind project that was pending in Vermont was withdrawn. Was I think it was last year. California, you can't build big wind in California. Just a few weeks ago in Shasta County, the Shasta County Commission rejected a pending wind project. You can't build wind projects in New York, another heavily Democratic state, in which the governor has, well, good riddance, Andrew Cuomo, you jerk. Glad to see you go. Why did it take you so long? He was saying, "Oh, New York's going to be 100% renewable." The backlash against wind energy in New York is widespread, and it's
yeah.
so difficult. The state is trying to Bigfoot local communities to force them to take big wind projects. I mean, it's really unprecedented the scale of this that is happening, and it's happening all across the country. And in Hawaii, and just a brief mention on that, in late 2019, 200 people were arrested on the island of Oahu protesting a wind project that was being built near the village of Kahuku. 200. You didn't read about it in the New York
Yeah.
Times. You didn't read about it in the Washington
Yeah.
Post. It doesn't fit the narrative about what is actually happening in America with regard to renewables.
Yeah, I suggested one possible interpretation of that uh, moderate downslope in the number of rejections and restrictions. But another explanation, equally plausible, is well, the wind companies are figuring out where they can build without generating a whole lot of local opposition and where they can't. So they're
Right.
staying away from the hazardous spots. And
Sure.
you know, you know, once burned, you stay away from the stovetop, I guess. And I think they may
Sure.
be learning how to do that. But
But
besides
I'll
that, I
also
think
just,
we're just
and that's a good point, Cal, but I'll add that in many of these cases, what's happening is these wind companies are then going after these small communities in court to try to force these projects on them. Let's look at
yeah,
Madison County, Iowa, famous for the bridges of Madison County, the subject of a book, famous of subject of a famous film, and I believe a Broadway
yeah,
play or Broadway musical. In December of last year, the county commissioners in Madison County passed an ordinance banning new wind projects. What happened within a few weeks? At Berkshire Hathaway, a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, controlled by the billionaire Warren Buffett, Mid American Energy, that subsidiary, sued Madison County, Iowa. Well, why? Because they're trying to force that county to take wind projects.
yeah,
Now, if this was the oil and gas industry doing that, it would be front page news in the New York Times. Instead, crickets, nothing, doesn't get reported.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So let's get into your study on not in our backyard a little bit more here. Um, you 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 ask the question in there, why are landowners objecting? Why are landowners objecting? And why don't you just run down a few of those answers for us, including something in terms of the impact of wind factories. I never call them farms, by the way. I don't know about you, but on farms you grow crops and animals. You don't build gigantic, steel structures that stretch up 600 feet in the air. But what are some of the health impacts of these things, as well as other reasons why people don't want these in their own backyards?
Sure. Well, to be clear, also I mentioned the number of rejections restrictions. You can find that database. It's in it's not the full database is not in the report that Cal has and will send you if you donate to Cornwall. But that database is available on the American Experiment website. It's also available on my website, robertbryce.com, and americanexperiment.org. You can find that database and look at for yourself with the news links there and find the news story that is reporting on this rejection and restriction. So why are landowners objecting? Well, first, let me just point out this idea of NIMBY and the idea of no, not an arm back. I hate that term. Everyone cares about what happens in their neighborhood. Everyone. And this idea that, oh, well, they're wrong or they shouldn't care. No, people care. And why do they care? Well, because many of them have bought their homes and that's their life savings. It's the biggest asset, most important asset they own. Well, of course they want to protect it. And so this idea that, oh, well, then they should just accept these 600-foot high wind turbines because of, well, climate change or whatever, they're facing a loss of property value. And numerous studies have found just that property values suffer, including a very large study that I cite in the report that was done in Germany, another study done by the London School of Economics. The data on this is clear. Why else do people care? Well, they don't want to look, they live out in the country. They don't want to look at red blinking lights all night, every night for the rest of their lives. I mean, are you kidding? They moved out in the country for a reason. They don't want their view sheds destroyed. But a final point, so the property values, tourism, in Scotland and Europe, numerous projects have been rejected because of the threat to tourism. A project that was scheduled or proposed for North Dakota was rejected for that same reason, too close to the local national park, Teddy Roosevelt National Park. So there are many reasons, but I think we have another slide about the human health issues, Cal, and this is one that is serious. That the industry will not fess up to, will not even hardly discuss. They dismiss it out of hand. But in doing the report for the Center of the American Experiment, I found I won't read this slide to you, you can read it yourself, but data from the Minnesota Department of Health from 2009 pointing out the issues and problems with noise from wind turbines, and in particular, the issue of sleep disturbance. Department of Health, World Health Organization, I mentioned Madison County, but there's studies from all over the world, Canada, Denmark, Iran, Germany, all coming to very similar conclusions. Well, if this noise from wind turbines isn't a problem, why then are so many people from so many countries all over the world complaining in the exact same ways? It's not coincidence. There's a real problem here. And low frequency noise and infrasound from wind turbines can harm human health. It can also hurt animal health. I write about that as well. So this is a key issue. And the blithe hand-waving and dismissal by some of these renewable energy advocates over this issue, I find frankly disgusting. And I do get wrapped up about this because I've interviewed so many people who've left their homes or living in their homes and they're miserable. I mean, it's an outrage what's happening.
Absolutely. And friends, really, you need ammunition. If you're facing the possibility of a renewable energy company wanting to locate a massive wind factory near you, dozens or scores, maybe even hundreds of wind turbines, or a huge solar array right near you, because there are problems with those as well that impact your property value, your health, the biodiversity in the area. All of these things are real problems. You really need to get a copy of Robert Bryce's Not in Our Backyard. This has all the facts you need to be able to go to your city council, your county commission, your state legislature, and show the reasons why these things are not a good substitute for coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear as sources of energy in this country. So as our way of saying thanks, when you give a 100% tax deductible donation to the Cornwall Alliance, we'd be glad to send you a copy of this free of charge. Absolutely. We even pay the postage. All you need to do to request your copy is go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and then as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, simply write in promo code 21-08 or the title Not in Our Backyard, and we'll be glad to send you a copy of this. Now, I'll also mention, by the way, that this month, August, is our birthday month. Our 16th birthday for the Cornwall Alliance is coming up on August 31st. We will have 3 special guests on the program then. Dr. Roy Spencer, climatologist from the University of Alabama, Dr. David Legates, climatologist from the University of Delaware, and Vijay Jayaraj, a climate scientist living in India, good friend of mine, who did his work amazingly initially at the University of East Anglia in the Climatic Research Unit, the origin of ClimateGate, which exposed the amazing corruption and scandal of so much of the climate science community. Vijay, Roy, and David will be our guests on the program next Tuesday night. So I'd encourage you to join us as we talk about some of the history of the Cornwall Alliance, what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and so on. And I just remind you that in this month of August, any gift that you give, because of the generosity of two other donors, will be matched up to a grand total of $25,000. The first $5,000 that we receive in the month of August will be tripled because both of these donors will match it. And the next $20,000 will be doubled with one of those donors continuing the match right up to a total of $25,000. So the first 5,000 donated will turn into 15,000. The next 20,000 will turn into 40. So the total 25,000 will become $55,000. So this is a great opportunity for you to give to the Cornwall Alliance and know that your gift is going to be doubled or possibly even tripled. So please do go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and fill out the form. And if you want a copy of Not in Our Backyard, just mention that in the comments field. All right, now, Robert, to go back to your report, one of the problems that you raise, and this is related to the whole energy density, power density issue that we talked about earlier, with wind and solar, is what you call the vacant land myth and the power density problem. Here's a great photo of the vast amount of land that's necessary to have a big solar array to generate a reasonable amount of electricity. It'd be interesting to think in terms of, okay, how much of that land would be required to generate the same amount of electricity from nuclear or natural gas or coal? It'd be a much, much smaller footprint. Excuse me. So tell us about this vacant land myth. I mean, as I fly over the United States, I see an awful lot of land that doesn't seem to be heavily occupied. Don't we have enough vacant land to do this?
No, we don't. We don't. And, as a friend of mine who used to work at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, he said, there are people, and he's done all kinds of project siting. He had a 30-year, some odd year career at FERC. It just is occurring to me as I'm saying this. He said, everywhere across this country, people care about their neighborhoods, and they think that every square acre in their neighborhood is the most beautiful acre that there is, and that they want to protect it. And so that comes to mind because although my project in this report that you're talking about, and I'm flattered that you're offering it to your donors, it's not just about wind, it's about solar as well. And in fact, just in the last few weeks, we've seen a very large solar project that was slated to be built north of Las Vegas. It was going to cover 14 square miles, 800 megawatts. It was withdrawn in large part because of local opposition. Local people were saying, no, we don't want, we live in the desert, but we use the desert out here. This isn't vacant land.
Yep.
We use it for camping. We use it for a whole lot of other reasons. So no, so that project went away. Another project, a massive project that was slated for near Butte, Montana, also rejected. Australia, just a few months ago, rejected a $36 billion wind and solar project. A township in Pennsylvania rejected was going to be Pennsylvania's largest solar project. The town of Cambria, New York, this was now 2 years ago, rejected a solar project. So the fundamental problem here is about power density. It's the enormous land use requirements for wind and solar. It's not, I've said it before, it's not about want to, it's not about money, it's about basic physics. And wind and solar just simply can't get there. It's like that old joke about the guy asking for directions and the farmer saying, well, you go down Finally, he just says, "No, sorry, mister, you can't get there from here." Well, you can't get there from here with wind and solar.
Yeah. Yeah. Our earlier slide showing in Texas the amount of space required by a nuclear plant versus a coal plant versus a natural gas plant versus a wind factory or solar factory, right? Um,
Or corn
you've
ethanol,
got
yeah.
another slide in this study on the power density of various energy sources. And
Right.
this one, I think, illustrates really, really well
Yeah.
the difference. Just just kind
And
of
and
give
this is
our
something that I
readers an
covered before,
understanding.
which is, of course, I mentioned the nuclear plant at Buchanan, New York, Indian Point Power Plant, which is now closed, Indian Point Energy Center. But yeah, 2,000 watts per square meter at Indian Point. I mentioned the multi-well pad, and then solar, as I said before, 10 watts per square meter, and wind at 1 watt per square meter. And those numbers are fixed, and they're not going to change. And I think we have another slide showing the amount of land that would be required if we were to attempt
Yeah,
to provide all electricity with wind energy in America. And this is data that's both from not just my calculations, that's actually incorrect. Václav Smil, one of the most respected energy analysts in North America, teaches at the University of Manitoba. In 2010, he did an estimate that meeting current current electricity demand, which is about 4,000 terawatt hours a year in the United States, would require 900,000 square kilometers of land if we tried to do it solely with wind. Those same numbers were corroborated in an analysis done in 2018 by two researchers at Harvard, David Keith and Lee Miller. They came up with the exact same number, 900,000 square kilometers. Well, that's an interesting number. Why? Because it's twice the size of the state of California. Well, why do we care about California? Because you can't build wind in California either. So this idea that we're going to set aside even one California for wind energy is it's nonsense on stilts. And yet we hear this drumbeat over and over and over again from some of the most elite academics in America, from some of the most prestigious universities in America. It's because they just don't. Either they don't want to know, they don't care, or they've never talked to rural county commissioners or rural landowners because that's just not part of their world. And we'll just put it,
yeah.
out there. There's a bunch of vacant land out there. Well, no, there ain't.
Well, there are an awful lot of people fleeing the state of California, and maybe what they want to do is to find two other Californians or Californias to go to.
Believe me, I know all about it. They're all moving to Austin. I know this. You don't have to
Yeah,
tell me where they're moving. They're coming
yeah,
here in droves.
the People's Republic of Austin. Although I gather that the folks who are fleeing California are mostly the more conservative types who are upset, partly
Well,
precisely
that may
because
be, but
of
I
the
think
energy policy
there are
in that state.
a lot of younger people are moving. People that want to have families and they don't have that opportunity in California. But I think if we just keep the conversation going, Cal, I think that why is this happening, and why
Yeah,
is this push for renewables happening? Well, there's a lot of talk. Oh, well, we have to do something about climate change. Well, the reality is that this is being driven by what? Money. What's the oldest maxim in
yeah,
politics? Follow the money. So I saw it here in Texas before the blackouts in February. Where was all the money spent in power generation? It was all spent effectively on wind and solar. But when you look at one of your, I know you reproduced some slides. Maybe we can show those. But on the amount of money that is being used on a per unit of energy produced basis, we see that the solar is getting 250 times more in federal tax incentives than is nuclear. Well, if we're serious about climate change, if we're serious about reducing emissions, we have to be serious about nuclear. But instead,
yeah,
we're giving lavish subsidies to solar. I mean, just enormous subsidies.
yeah. Yeah, I think that those will be for our producer what he has numbered slides 13 and 14. Estimated energy related tax incentives 2020 to 29. And folks can see there the reduced tax rate for nuclear decommissioning, advanced nuclear power production tax credit, expensing of exploration costs for oil and natural gas, depletion allowance for oil and natural gas. Those things look like fairly large amounts of money. $1.3 billion for the nuclear stuff. $7 billion for exploration costs for oil and natural gas. But then you compare those with the investment tax credit for solar and the production tax credit for wind, and these just dwarf them. And yet, the next slide, slide number 14, shows this in a very different way, and that is per unit of energy actually generated, and the differences are much, much greater. Run that
Right. So,
down for us.
if
Yeah,
I could just hit on that, Cal, because yeah, I mean, the previous slide was in absolute numbers, right? This is the, if we just
yep,
tally up all the data, solar and wind together are getting 4 times more in tax credits than all oil and gas, even though we produce far more oil and gas on an absolute basis than we do wind and solar. You're giving 4 times more in absolute numbers. But then when you look at it and you compare us, I did this comparison myself with Congressional Research Service data and just looked at the amount of energy produced in 2018. Why are we giving all of this money to solar? And I say this as someone who I have solar panels on the roof of my house. I got 3 different subsidies for putting solar panels on my house. But the fact is that when you compare it on this is on exajoules, dollars per exajoule in that year of 2018, 250 times more the federal tax love is going to solar than it is to nuclear, and 160 times more for wind as compared to nuclear. We're giving more to hydrocarbons than we are to nuclear. So follow the money. Follow the money. Why is this happening?
yeah,
It's because the big business, Wall Street banks, they love these tax credits, and they're making billions of dollars on the and in money that is not going into the federal treasury. Instead, it's allowing them to not pay taxes, and this is something that has to be fixed, and it has to be fixed right away because it's distorting the electricity markets all across the country.
yeah. And again, you've mentioned before, I mean, you're a journalist. I was a journalist for about 10 years of my life, uh, grew up in the home of a journalist. And you would think that journalists all over America would be looking at figures like this and saying, this is just scandalous. I mean, we are, know, would you want to go to a store and pay 150 times as much for a peach from one bin as you do for a peach from another bin? I don't think so. Well, that's essentially what we're being asked to do through these tax subsidies, tax write-offs to wind and solar versus nuclear and natural gas. It's just a crazy thing, and why so much of the media is not following the money on this, whereas they're delighted to talk about big oil or big gas or big coal. I don't know. What do you think? What's your pulse
Well,
on
oh,
why the
Cal,
media don't do
I like to quote Lily Tomlin, the great comedian. Who I saw on Broadway one
that?
time, and I thought she was just fabulous. She said that no matter how cynical I get, I can't keep up, and that's
Yeah,
it describes my cynicism about a lot of this policy. That we're
yeah,
told, oh, we're doing, we're the Clean Power Association. We're for clean power. Well, you're
yeah,
producing power that is incredibly heavily subsidized, that is weakening the grid, and is effectively subsidizing the carpeting of rural America with visual blight. And so I'm opposed to
yeah,
that. And we haven't talked about wildlife. I'm an avid bird watcher. The effect that these wind turbines are having on bats and birds is enormous. It's being
yep,
ignored largely by federal regulators. And so, I mean, these are issues that need a lot more attention. And I'm pleased that the Cornwall Alliance is looking at it. And I'm proud of this report. As I'll reiterate, you can find it on your,
yeah,
obviously, if you donate to Cornwall, you can get a free copy. You can find the subsidy or the database listing all of the rejections, there are 312 so far between 2015 and 2021 on my website, robertbryce.com, or on the americanexperiment.org website. So I encourage people, knowledge is power. Money, the
yeah.
data matters. And so if you're one of these people who are in rural America and you're fighting a project, you have to know your stuff, and you have to have your numbers. And I hope that the report does contributes to that.
Yeah, and we have about 5 minutes left. Robert, I think the one last thing I'd like for you to talk about is how are rural communities fighting back? You discuss this in section 4 of your report. I
Right.
believe that's slide number 9. And this is, it's interesting that you have this photo of a helicopter on a helipad in the middle of a big, what looks like a big pasture, crop field. Uh, how does that relate? It's a great story. I loved reading it.
Well, I'm glad you reminded me of that because I've actually kind of forgotten about it, Cal. A lot of water's gone under the bridge since April when the report was published, and we were going to publish it last year, but nevertheless, in some communities, in Michigan, I know for sure that several communities they were facing the prospect of wind projects being put near them, and so they started staking out heliports and getting licensing for heliports because you can't put wind turbines too close to a helicopter landing zone. So I thought, well, that's kind of a fun idea. And the reality is that it helped them head off some of these wind projects that were proposed for their county or their region. But there are many things that local communities can do, and I detail them in the report. There are several model
Right.
ordinances that have been produced that people that regulators can use, but they're using longer setbacks, noise limits, decommissioning requirements. There are a number of tools that communities can use to block these projects, these unwanted projects. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. There have been a lot of communities that just flat lost and had these projects rammed down
Yeah.
their throats, and they're going to be there for a long time. And maybe we can end with just the human part of this here, Cal, because you know there's a blithe acceptance in a lot of America to the suffering, or a lot in the world to the suffering of other people. And over the past 10 or 11, 12 years now, I've interviewed so many people around the world who have suffered because of these projects being built near them and the outrage that they feel. And I'm talking particularly about people who've had, problems with the noise. And
Yeah.
it's a real problem. And yet they're not, because they live in rural America and because they don't have a lot of money and, and big media outlets don't really care about, in big cities, don't really care about rural America. They don't go out there. These people are being hurt, and that's what motivates me. And
Yeah.
I think of it as, without sounding too grandiose, it's part of what my calling is. It's part of my purpose. That this is a
Yeah.
story that needs. These are issues that need more attention, and so I appreciate Cornwall paying attention and allowing me to talk about it because, as I said, I care about this stuff. I care about it a lot, and
Yeah.
it's because it's a human story ultimately, and there are people who are being abused on their own property, and they didn't do anything to deserve it, and it's not right.
Absolutely. And I've seen that compassion, that care with which you approach these issues in all of the things that you've written. I think it comes through perhaps better than anywhere else in your new film, Juice, on providing electricity to people. It's an amazing film, and I would highly recommend that our viewers go and see Juice. Tell your friends about it. Link it on your Facebook page or in your Twitter or Instagram. Anything. It's an excellent film. And Robert, thank you again for joining us. Do you have sort of a closing comment for us?
Oh, sure. Well, again, thank you, Cal. Thanks for the invite. Thanks to Jim for making it happen on the technical side. I'm easy to find if you want to look at my work. I'm on robertbryce.com is my website. Our film is
Yes.
juicethemovie.com. I have a podcast, the Power Hungry Podcast, which you can find on all the podcast outlets. I'm on YouTube. So you can find me on the Google, on the interweb. I'm there. But yeah, I encourage people to get educated on these issues because they matter. And they matter not just for the fate of rural America, they matter for the integrity of our electric grid, which is the most important network in our society. And we ignore that network at our extreme peril. So I'll
Yeah.
stop there. But thanks again, Cal. I sure appreciate it.
Well, and thank you again, Robert. We've talked about the opposition, the resistance to these things in local communities. We haven't really talked at all about the problems of where you get the rare earth metals to build wind turbines and solar arrays, primarily from China and Democratic Republic of the Congo, where a lot of the labor is done in the mining and the refining and whatnot by children and by women, and a good deal of it apparently by slave labor. They're exposed to highly toxic chemicals in the process, and disease is just rampant in places like that. So those are problems. We haven't talked about the geopolitical problems of depending for our energy on countries that are not exactly friendly to us. We're not doing well in that regard as we depend more and more on wind and solar, because the essential components of these come from China and other places where they're not exactly friendly to us. So there are all kinds of issues. You mentioned decommissioning a while ago, and all of these things wear out. And frankly, wind turbines and solar panels are not easily recycled. To a great extent, they're not recyclable at all. And they're resulting in a lot of, much of it toxic waste to go into landfills and the like. So, but what we've focused on tonight is the impact of these things on local communities. And I hope that our viewers will grasp that this is something that the underdogs need champions, and they need facts. And Robert, you've provided those in Not in Our Backyard. Again, I'll remind our viewers that for the month of August, as our thanks, when you make a 100% tax deductible donation of literally any size to the Cornwall Alliance, we will send you a free copy of Not in Our Backyard if you ask for it. To ask for your copy, just go to cornwallalliance.org, click on the donate button, and as you fill out the donation form, when you come to the comments field, just enter promo code 21-08 or the title Not in Our Backyard, and we'll be glad to send you a copy of this. Meanwhile, let me remind you, next Tuesday night will be our birthday party, and we'd like to have our birthday party in your house. By your joining us on From the Stacks, when our guests will be Dr. Roy Spencer, Dr. David Legates, and Vijay Jayaraj, three people who have had a lot of influence, a lot of input on the work of the Cornwall Alliance for our history. So please come and join us on our birthday. And do remember that through the month of August, the first $5,000 donated will be tripled, and the second $20,000, the next $20,000 will be doubled. So this is an opportunity for you to give, and to give extra effectively to the ministry of the Cornwall Alliance. Thank you again for joining us this evening. God bless you. See you next week.